Yo, welcome back everybody to the #1 TV show on the internet. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, both books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing Stephen King's brand new novel, Fairy Tale. Came out a couple days ago. I bought it a couple days ago. Been reading it the last couple days. I finished it and I'm here to give you my review. Let's talk about the cover first, because we always start with the covers, because you know I love graphic design and cover illustration. So let's do it. Let's give this cover a little bit of a once-over. It's pretty snazzy, pretty eye-catching. It is a beautiful illustration of a stone garden or something with like some sort of a stone staircase going down, 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 down. We've got a dog over here and a dude over here. Well, our main character, he's not a dude. Well, he is a dude. He's a young dude. Young Charlie, our main character, and the dog Radar going down into the portal. Where does it go? We shall find out. This illustration was done by, I searched the book. It didn't give me one illustrator. It just gave me a myriad of different design firms and people that may or may not have illustrated this cover. What's cool, though, what's extraordinarily super awesome and dope about this book is there are a lot of illustrations throughout. I mean, there's probably 24 or more illustrations that are done, and just done wonderfully in this book. I loved all the illustrations, all done by an artist by the name of Gabriel Rodriguez. And they're just delightful. Every single one of them is just better than the next. I just really loved all of them. I'll just show you a few here. But they are all through the book. And they're just great. So that was an extra feature I was not expecting. So yay for that. The publisher did an absolute great job in packaging a wonderful Stephen King novel for us. Thumbs up for that. Now, I listened to the audible.com version also. Well, I actually listened to the first half in Audible, and then I wanted to speed up my reading, so I turned off the Audible and read the second half of the book just without the Audible, just because I'm a faster reader than the Audible narrator. Even when I speed that thing up to like 200. Sometimes I speed it up to 250, so it sounds like the chipmunks are reading the book for me. Still too slow for me. I'm a pretty fast reader. Anyway, the Audible narrator was Seth Numerick. He did a good job in the first half of the book that I listened to, so that's great. Now let's get to the meat of the book. I was promised that this would be a fantasy novel. People were saying, this is Stephen King's newest, it's going to be a fantasy novel, like Eye of the Dragon, his first fantasy novel since Eye of the Dragon. And I was like, okay, so then I start reading it. I'm getting quite a ways into it. And I'm like, this don't seem like no fantasy novel to me. It seems like just kind of like step for step every other Stephen King novel I've sort of read, and we'll get into that. It doesn't even seem like The Dark Tower. I mean, that was sort of a fantasy landscape. So let's just kind of start, and we'll go through this book a little bit. No spoilers, of course. But I'm going to talk about a few things. Charlie is our main character. 7 years old is when the book starts. He is 7 when the book starts. And it starts tragically. His mom is killed by a dump truck on a bridge. It's a bad, only described, the death of his mom described only in the gruesome, bloody detail that Stephen King can give us, just with those little details sprinkled in that just horrify us. And great scene. I mean, I hate to say the death of some young boy's mother is a great scene, but I just love the way Stephen King writes these things to make you really, it really hits you in the feels, as bloody as it is. I mean, his mom was just going out to get some chicken dinner at their favorite restaurant and been like some takeout, didn't bring it home for the family, and she's dead. Well, anyway, his dad doesn't take the death well. Well, nobody takes the death well, but dad in particular becomes an alcoholic, and so Charlie grows up in kind of dire circumstances. I mean, it's so far the book, first couple hundred pages, typical Stephen King coming-of-age tale where the young boy has shit for parents, there's tragedy in his family, and this is where we're going. He loves to play baseball. He's got all of these things that he loves, but it's just kind of all held back by this alcoholic father and the tragedy that he suffered in his life. Well, then we get to when he's the age of 17. And so we kind of get a snippet of him when he's 7, and then we jump to when he's 17. He still loves baseball. He's still doing kid things. He's still doing teenager things. And I'm like, where's the fantasy? I was promised a fantasy novel. I was promised. I mean, that's what people were saying. This is going to be a fantasy novel. So far, this is just as much a fantasy novel as any of the other Stephen King books out here. I mean, if you want to consider all of them fantasy novels, I guess we can. And this is like lockstep with all the rest of them. And then things sort of turn. 17-year-old Charlie meets Bowditch, an old man, sort of a crotchety old man. The guy falls off a ladder. Charlie calls 911, helps the old man, sort of befriends the old man, sort of becomes like a little bit of a hero for helping the old man who's fallen off the ladder. The old man sort of befriends Charlie, and he's a curmudgeonly guy, and he doesn't really befriend anybody, but he befriends Charlie. And he lets Charlie sort of take care of his dog, Radar. So the old man Bowditch has a dog named Radar, and Charlie starts to, become pals with the dog, pals with the old man, and the old man even gives Charlie access to his house, which is kind of like the Psycho house. There's even a drawing in here done by Gabriel Rodriguez where the house looks like the Psycho house, the house from Psycho. It's dope. And he gives Charlie sort of the run of the house, to take care of things, and Charlie finds what is a magical portal. And that's where the fantasy stuff begins. So it's kind of like a portal fantasy. So as I'm reading this book, I'm sort of getting a lot of sort of Rose Madder vibes crossed with 11/22/63 vibes. It's like the this portal fantasy where you sort of enter a dreamscape fantasy world like Rose Madder, but also kind of crossed with the time travel thing. So I don't want to get into much more detail than that. Well, I will get a little bit more. I'll give some more vague details. I don't want to get into what happens with Charlie and Radar as they go down into this portal. As you can see, both the boy and the dog go down as they go into this portal and have their adventures in this fantasy universe. But it's a magical portal, and it's more of like, to describe the fantasy world would do it. Well, I'll do it. I'll describe it, but I'm going to do it a lot of injustice. It's kind of like it's not like your Game of Thrones or your Lord of the Rings fantasy world. It's not even like Narnia or Harry Potter. It's kind of like this weird acid trippy dreamscape of a place. It's like a Clockwork Fun House, Lovecraftian Alice in Wonderland type fantasy landscape where just there's sort of like there's wolves, there's girls that don't have mouths, there's gray men, there's Charlie gets called a prince a lot of the times. There's a lot of dark dungeons that they adventure through. And then the whole time I'm trying to figure out where this kind of thing fits into Stephen King's multiverse, because I will tell you there are a lot of Easter eggs along that vein. I won't get into any more of that. But there's, he enters this, like what I said, just this bizarro fantasy world. It's kind of a fallen kingdom. There's a sundial that turns back time. That's why I referenced 11/22/63. And this is where the fantasy starts. I mean, it's a 600-page novel. The first 200 pages are dedicated to just setting up Charlie and his life in the real world, sort of his tragic life, his meeting of Bowditch and the dog Radar, and him exploring the Psycho house, finding the portal, and then finally, about 200 pages in, he ventures into the portal, and that's where we start to get the magical flavor and the fantasy world. And I'm telling you, it is a wild and crazy and exciting and heartbreaking, yet joyful, almost fantasy world filled with creatures, both, you know, bad and good. Those are really bad adjectives. I mean, there's got to be. Anyway, you get it. It's a Stephen King. It's a bizarro Stephen King universe, just as bizarro as The Dark Tower or Eyes of the Dragon or any one of the other epic, crazy horror novels that he's given us. And there's a wonderful dog named Radar that we get to travel around with. Also, we don't just go to follow Charlie and his adventures. We actually get to follow Radar and some of what goes on with that guy. And he's just a delightful little dog companion that goes along on the adventure. And Stephen King says in the very beginning of this, there's a little introduction. He says he wanted to write a feel-good story because people had suffered enough BS through the COVID pandemic, and he just wanted to write something that people could enjoy and love. And this is it. It's a very lovely book. I will say it starts on a gruesome note, but I think you got to start on a gruesome note like that to dig your way out of it, as it were. As it were. Anyway, I quite enjoyed the book. I read it fast. It was a fast read. It's got typical Stephen King, just prose with just, you know, all the stuff we love about Stephen King prose, where he just goes off on these little tangents here and there, and they don't seem to make sense, but they all tie together, and even if they don't tie to anything, we love it anyway because we love Stephen King's writing. Great book. Probably not one of my favorite books of Stephen King's, I will admit. I think I just like his horror novels more so than when he kind of adventures into fantasy land. You know, with Eyes of the Dragon, with The Dark Tower, and now with Fairy Tale, he's sort of taken us into some fantasy areas. And I like the horror stuff. I like, you know, I'm an It guy. Even though It could be a fantasy. Well, it is a fantasy. It's not real. It ain't real. They're all make-believe stories. Anyway, you get the point. I am going to give this a solid, very, very solid, and I enjoyed this quite a bit, so I am giving this an 8 out of 10. Another great entry into the massive library of Stephen King novels I've got over here. This will fit on this shelf. Just lovely. And we'll see you next time.